Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. The Center for Zero Waste Design has organized this event with the AIA Committee on the Environment and also the Association for Public Space Leadership, who are going to start with an introduction. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. I'm Bria Donahue, Senior Manager of Government Affairs for AIA New York.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Mackless. I lead strategic initiatives for Municipal Art Society focused on urban design and policy. I think we have some slides. Great. So we are here tonight representing Alliance for Public Space Leadership, or as we call APSL. What is that acronym, you may ask? So we were founded in 2022, preceding my time, I think Bria's at both organizations, by MAS, AIA New York, Open Plans, and New Yorkers for Parks, I think I got all of them, to advocate for the appointment of the city's first ever Chief Public Realm Officer. We've since been joined by over 50 organizations, spanning community-based advocates, street vendors, volunteers, design professionals. I think I forgot a lot, but you can check out on our website, and the list is here. So we've expanded our mission to advocate for achieving equitable solutions and effective management of New York City's public realm.
So how do we define public realm, you may ask? In the broadest sense, it encompasses all publicly accessible exterior spaces composed of streets, sidewalks, parks, plazas, waterfronts, natural areas, and more. The system of public space represents roughly 40% of the city's landmass, so obviously a big priority.
And, you know, I think that number 40% isn't often talked about. 40% is a huge amount of our footprint, and we're really trying to think about public realm as public infrastructure and understanding that it touches on so many things that are so vital to our livelihood and vitality in the city. So these spaces support our economic vitality, connect New Yorkers to each other, are critical to our health and well-being, not to mention to mitigate the consequences of climate change and ensure survival of our diverse ecosystems. But the Alliance right now is sort of together based on the premise that there's more to be done. We need to do more to create and maintain these spaces, maintenance being a huge portion, and also activating them. And we believe that these solutions are better when we think about them together.
So last year, or this past winter, sorry, time is flying, we convened all of our members together in this very space to talk about and develop a collective policy platform, and we were also joined by the Chief Public Realm Officer, Ya-Ting Liu, to talk about what she's doing in her role and all things public realm and how the city is prioritizing it. And we put together 6 big buckets of our strategies to take a comprehensive and holistic approach to improving our public realm. So 1, investing in public space, reforming the city's permitting process to enable activation, expanding what is considered public space throughout the city, reviewing our procurement practices to enable greater innovation, creating a citywide public realm plan, and then ensuring the success of the Chief Public Realm Officer that we worked so hard to get installed.
And so comprehensive planning is one of the things that brings us here tonight. Thank you, Claire, for inviting us to give our little intro spiel. As we consider comprehensive and holistic design of the public realm at a time where there's more demands than ever, how can we find solutions that streamline the footprint of stuff in our streets? With the ever-present competition, we've all seen it, bike racks, trash, wayfinding, all the things. What are our priorities and what are the most effective and equitable ways that we can create systems as solutions? How can we maximize co-benefits and create multifunctional things that use our finite public realm in strategic ways? So we're really excited for the panel tonight to dive into some of these further. And with that, we wanted to turn it over to Claire. Claire is the founder and executive director of Center for Zero Waste Design and Think Woven. She probably, doesn't need more introduction for you all here tonight, but to give a brief plug of her work with APSL, I think you joined 2021, if I'm correct, after releasing the Put Waste to Work advocacy campaign. She's since been continually involved, presenting on waste containerization and contributing to discussions on curbside management and public space. Thank you so much for having us, and over to you.
Thank you so much. And I also would like to, I mean, it's so good to be back in this space. This is where we did the zero waste design guidelines. I have to thank the AIA New York. They believed in the vision of the zero waste design guidelines when it was just an idea, and have supported me the whole way through doing an exhibit, Designing Waste, during the AIA National Convention with actually garbage on a pedestal, and continue to support. So I really want to thank them. I want to thank WXY, who we have Adam on the panel tonight, but Claire Weiss has been so supportive, and they did the Put Waste to Work campaign with us. I want to thank Juliet Spurters and Ben Miller. Juliet's here tonight as Closed Loops. They did the collection portion of the Zero Waste Design Guidelines, so many of their ideas are in this report. I want to thank my team in the second row here who did this amazing report with me, and many people from city agencies, from Department of Sanitation, DOT, city planning, who over the years, present and past, I've talked to, and it has helped with this plan. So we released it yesterday, and it's kind of a result of many years of work, and it looks at what current plans are for Department of Sanitation for waste containerization, and ways we think they could be a little bit improved. So this is just kind of an overview of the report. What is it? Why are we doing it? How could it be designed into streetscapes? What are the best solutions for different building types? And then how might it be implemented? We are called the Center for Zero Waste Design. I mean, if we're gonna do such a huge, expensive, massive project as containerizing New York City's waste, shouldn't it be done in tandem with trying to reduce it a little bit? The benefits are obvious in terms of the costs of the program, the space taken up, and achieving our zero waste goals. We've been using this argument for a long time. Bags do create litter and rats, and that is one impetus to do containerization. Another one is the fact that our sidewalks are serving waste rather than pedestrians. Third one is that the trash-centric solutions don't help us divert waste. I mean, New York City Housing Authority mid-century buildings are a good example. If you have a trash chute like that on your floor in the corridor, but you have to go into the middle of the development outside to throw away your recycling, you're not going to get a good recycling rate. We don't want to be repeating that design problem and just designing a solution for trash when we go to the next phase of designing our city for waste containerization. So, you know, actually the Green Codes Task Force did actually change New York City codes for new buildings so that you're not allowed to have just a trash chute without recycling bins alongside. So, you know, we're designing that into new buildings. As we design a new system set citywide, I believe we should also not be doing a trash-only solution. And then manual lifting. I mean, whenever I go on vacation, I am videoing trash trucks. And whenever, I always speak to the guys in whatever my bad French, bad Spanish, I managed to say in New York City, they pick up by bags. And everybody is amazed. They're like, that's allowed by health and safety? Really? In America, they do it that way? They lift 5 tons a shift? The strain on these workers' backs says statistics that show how many of them take weeks off work, because lifting 5 tons a shift is just not the way we should be doing things. So making it better for labor in the building and on the street is huge too. And so back when we were doing the zero waste design guidelines, we did these kind of, how can you collect waste in New York City? And there was some pushback from Department of Sanitation, like, architects never do renderings of their buildings and show all the trash bags in front. I'm like, yeah, but if you think about it, this is the choice you give them. Bags or a roll-off container with 25-foot headroom and 60-foot depth. You know, it's not a lot of choice for architects to fit these big roll-off containers in their space. So necessarily they go with bags. So I'm very happy that the conversation has changed now and the city is thinking of getting trucks to pick up different types of containers, both the having lifts for the wheel bins and the side load containers, which aren't actually shown here. We spend a lot of time doing case studies from other cities. Some of these are in the zero waste design guidelines. We then, Hong Kong in the middle there, came from a grant we got from the Hong Kong Design Trust to look at Hong Kong and Singapore, other high density cities and how they manage waste. And then we also did this Put Waste to Work campaign. Now this was to ask the incoming administration to come up with a holistic plan for waste. We asked, it was both an advocacy campaign that 4 former sanitation commissioners, as well as about 40 organizations, including AIA and Open Plans, Municipal, signed on to say, yes, the incoming administration should do a holistic plan to better manage waste. We had a lot of strategies in there, which were kind of divided into 3 groups. How can we circulate materials so reuse comes before disposal? Everything from reusable cups to packaging to just embedding circular infrastructure in the city so we can reuse everything from building materials to cups, to books. How can libraries be for more than books? So that was circulate. The next one was waste containerization, and how can that help the city get to its zero waste goals? And thirdly was how can we regenerate our soils with compost, and how can we kind of embed that into the city so we can really have stewardship of green infrastructure that has to be at a community scale. And we recognized that the high level of labor required in the private sector for New York City's waste system is inequitable. Like you have your highly financed bid that has enough money to keep your streets clean, but then you have neighborhoods in other neighborhoods that don't have that kind of finance for the bids, and they can't keep the streets clean. It's the same on a building scale. Our system is just such high labor that it brings inequities. Okay, so next let's get to the current plans for containerization and where they came from. The Future of Trash report on the left, that was the McKinsey study that my consultancy, Think Woven, was subcontracted to McKinsey, so we played a minor role in developing that. Actually, that's one of our in-progress renderings on the front cover. The Future of Trash had this solution in the bottom left, which was suggesting shared containers for all waste streams in the street and individual bins for the smaller buildings. But then there was this pilot done in West Harlem, which actually just put dumpsters in the parking lane. They did it for all waste types for schools, but for the residential, it was just for trash. I believe they were vastly oversized. They always seemed empty when I went by. There was as many as 18 dumpsters on a single block. They didn't really solve anything much for public space. Yes, we've heard they reduced rat complaints, but many buildings had kept their trash bins on the sidewalk. I would love to see a more comprehensive evaluation of them. Like, did they reduce the recycling rate because people could just put trash right there and had to go to the basement or somewhere else to do their recycling? I've also heard, you know, was there any illegal dumping from commercial businesses? These kind of things would be really useful to know as we move forward. And then lastly, there's been some press releases now which kind of show us how DSNY have changed their plans. There's not been any updated reports. The new plans have just been communicated through press releases and that New York Times article, The Absurd Situation, which was pretty thorough. But basically, it's the bins for the small buildings and the side load containers for the larger buildings. We'll get into more detail on that. So I love this quote, that we have to do containerization right. I totally agree. And we need vibrant neighborhood streets. We need to design it in the public realm. I mean, this is from the Yating's report. And, you know, it's really thinking about how to integrate everything into the public realm, but waste containerization, I mean, it's accurate, but it's not the best way it can be integrated into the public realm. So I think that needs to be brought into the conversation with all the other amazing work that's being done in the public realm. And there's a lot of contributing factors from what's the fleet, you know, how can you get curb access with all the competing pressures on the curb? And how do you stack that, like number of containers with collection frequency? This is from actually the Future of Trash, and this is currently what happens with Department of Sanitation. Trash is either picked up twice or 3 times a week, and then both recycling streams and organics are picked up on the same day. So if you imagine you have a building, you have to store everything, like 2 days of trash and a whole week of everything to set out on the same day. Whereas if that was staggered, you'd need less space in your building. And many other cities, like Barcelona, collects at least once a day, so they have fewer containers in their street. There's a lot of competing priorities that need to be kind of considered. And then here are the basic model types. There's the side lift container, which is what Department of Sanitation are going to get for the large buildings. Hoist is an alternative. I mean, there's pros and cons to both of them. They can be a little tighter packed. They're a little cleaner because they empty from the bottom. One truck can do left and right hand. These have to be left or right-handed, but they're a bit more expensive. They take more weight. There's a lot of pros and cons of both. They need more headroom. DSNY's current rear load trucks can have a lift added and take 2 or 4-wheel bins. This is Paris, this is Vienna, that both cities have trucks like that. And then bins can go within enclosures, like the on-street organics bins, or this is some of the pilot where there are wheeled bins in enclosures. So I'm just going to go quickly through the different building types, what the solutions are. This is how Department of Sanitation have divided it up: 1 to 9 unit buildings, 10 to 30, and 31 plus. And in their world, there's one solution for 1 to 9, which is the 2-wheeled bins for trash. And then that's the only thing that's required. But obviously, organics kind of has to be in a bin, but you can use bags for recycling. And then on the large building, you have to have this shared trash 4 cubic yard container in the street. The in-between buildings can choose. So our solution also uses these same containers in the street, but uses them for the smaller buildings. 1 to 2 family buildings detached could have these 2-wheel bins, or they could use shared containers. But once you get into row houses, we think you have to move to these because of the public realm and keeping our sidewalks free from bins. And then for the large buildings, we think the 4-wheeled bins that are temporarily staged are the solution. So that's just an overview. And whether you go here or here, there's not an exact cutoff in our mind. It depends on access, space, labor, whether you have a trash chute. So the small 1 to 9 unit buildings first. Many of these buildings are walk-ups above storefronts. In fact, 20% of attached 1 to 9 unit buildings citywide are above storefronts. In Manhattan, that goes up to 40% of these buildings in Manhattan above storefronts. So if you imagine in these buildings, most residents keep their waste in their apartment till the day it's set out, and then they bring it out and they set it out on the street. There are no bins currently because there's not space if there's a storefront on the ground floor in the basement. Occasionally they slip them under the stairs, but there's not a lot of space. So what you will see is bins on the sidewalk. And if you just had a 6-unit building, it would take this many bins for trash and organics and for commercial. It fills the whole space, which is ridiculous if we want people to be shopping in our brick and mortar stores. Instead, it would be much more convenient for these residents to be able to take their waste and recycling, all streams, out to shared containers in the street. And on a short block, that takes less than 3 equivalent of parking spaces. It has to be integrated. We have a table later on that shows the number of spaces. It obviously depends on frequency. That was for current frequency. Similarly for row houses, you know, front gardens, your windows, I think some basement apartments are not even used because the trash bins are right outside. Again, if there's steps, it's hard to bring them down and keep them inside. There's often not space. So again, a shared on-street solution would make sense. And, you know, we see this all over, these bins already blocking storefronts. It's just going to get worse in November when that rule comes in. At the moment, there's a lot of commercial bins. Sometimes they're residential bins. I think this is both, actually. But much better if we can keep our sidewalks free from any permanent bins and just put the containers in the street. Medium buildings, in Department of Sanitation's view, they have a choice. They could either have one container for trash and still have their bags for the recycling and organics, or they could have multiple individual bins for trash, the two-wheel bins. We've seen from the Harlem pilot, many times they kept the bins on the sidewalk because the residents come and use those, and then the super just would move the trash into the shared on-street one. There is some convenience for supers that they can throw out the trash whenever they like and not have to store it in the building, but it will reduce recycling rates if it's more convenient to throw out trash than to deal with recycling, and it doesn't necessarily clean our sidewalks. So both of the solutions for DSNY, there's either this one, also they're not shared, so many of these buildings won't fill up that 4 cubic yard container, so it's not very space efficient to have them in front of every single, say, 20-unit building. And if they decide to go all the two-wheel bins, on one long block, you would need 600 bins for trash and organics. Imagine the Department of Sanitation coming down the block and lifting and emptying 600 bins and then putting them back on the sidewalk. That's not going to be able to happen in an orderly way with the speed they need to go. Our sidewalks are going to be like, this is just with 5. Imagine 600. So again, we think the solution for this size building is really these shared containers in the parking lane. How many shared containers? I mean, the numbers can play depending on collection frequency. We kind of felt that you don't really want more than 6 groups per block. So you can get that if you have 6 times a week pickup, which isn't unheard of in many other cities. And these are kind of, the reason it goes down again is because we took the average width of that size building in Manhattan. So what might that look like on a long block? You know, you might have to walk, if you live here, 200 feet to put this out. This was with the 4. If there's 6, you'd need to walk less. But you could dispose of it whenever you liked, and your front gardens could have gardens in them and impervious ground for stormwater, and your streetscapes would just be so much nicer. And then the other thing is, as we move towards more waste streams, like they're considering studying picking up textiles, you can add extra waste streams. I'm from England, and there was like a BBC announcement. Council expects us to have 7 bins, like every house having 7 bins. It doesn't make sense once we move towards more waste streams to have individual ones. So consolidating shared on street for smaller buildings or in a building for larger buildings is what makes sense. So here we go, large buildings. We did a study, we got money from Association for Better New York to look at Vanderbilt, these 6 blocks coming down with this one big building. And we've worked for a lot of buildings and looked at their waste. And for trash to come down to a chute, to be put into bags, the bags to be put into these 4-wheeled hampers, brought up, and then lifting them all into these permanent containers in the street doesn't make sense to us. When those chutes could be retrofitted to go straight into 4-wheel bins, you get more than double the compaction, and the staff can just wheel them from compactor to the sidewalk, to the street, and set them out. And if Department of Sanitation changed the days they pick up the different waste streams, you could pick up different streams on different days in the same area of the street, which could be used for different deliveries, commercial waste pickup, other things at other times of day. It's better use of less use of the curb lane, less maintenance for the building because they don't have to maintain this permanent containers on the street, and better for our streetscapes, and better for labor because they're not lifting all these. because it's kind of similar to what happens now. You're just putting them into the four-wheel bins, and instead of stacking them onto the street, they would be doing the same process, except for they would be putting it into a 4 cubic yard container, rather than just wheeling something, staging it for collection. And we're really happy to say we've been working with Hoboken. We were sub to Eunomia on their zero waste plan, and as part of that, they're looking at containerization, and they similarly have bags on the street, and they're going to retrofit some of their compactors, and Hardal, who are a UK-based international company, are doing that, so we can actually hopefully have a proof of concept the beginning of next year, and all New Yorkers can just go across and take a little look if it works well. Commercial waste, we also talk about, we've seen so much of these bins on the sidewalk. We believe it should be tied into commercial waste zoning. So maybe you have a corral of bins, a bit like this, that is somehow screened on the street. Or with commercial waste zoning, when you've only got 1 to 3 haulers and they've got a longer contract, they could be incentivized to put in infrastructure on the street to serve multiple businesses. Again, let's just try and get those bins off the sidewalk. Bid managed litter bin waste is another one where there have been a lot of kind of different pilots, the clean curb pilots. Bids empty these litter bins and stack them in bags, and the idea is to containerize that. We think Department of Sanitation, maybe the side load containers make sense here, but seems like there should be a kind of range of solutions that are provided for the bids rather than every bid having to kind of come up with the design themselves. And then this is a quote from Margaret, who's one of our panelists, just talking about that kind of gold rush to the curb. So how does it get implemented? We talk a little bit about some of the things that will need to be considered, like who's going to pay for the containers. That's not clear in the Department of Sanitation report. For the pilot, Department of Sanitation are procuring them, but they told me that moving forward, it hasn't been decided if the building would have to buy the large containers or not. For the bins, every household or building owner will have to buy them, and there's a lot of pushback there. A lot of people are saying, I bought them, they were stolen, and they're being told to go to the police, and they're like, are you joking? So, many other cities provide the bins. And then who's responsible for cleaning up? Most other cities with shared containers, they clean up around them. And again, this is an equity issue. Who pays for them and who cleans up? Curb management, this is a DOT curb management action plan. That has to obviously be tied in, how we manage our curbs, how waste ties into that. And then fleet changes. These are the regular trucks, which they had a rear lift added for the pilot. A similar rear lift could be added to do the 4-wheel bins. In fact, the lift they're adding for the 2-wheel bins may work. I added this because we're in the AIA. We got a contract to look at zoning incentives for roll-off containers with the Department of Sanitation. And as we looked at it, we're like, roll-off containers really don't make sense unless you have about 1,000 units, as we're moving towards zero waste, because there's less and less trash. So why put in that expensive infrastructure when a 4-wheel bin solution uses less space? So we kind of figured out if you just have a staging room on the ground floor, that's about 1 square foot per dwelling unit. If you have a ground floor central room, that would be 3 square foot per dwelling unit. And we're happy to say that in the city of Yes for Housing Opportunity, DCP took us up on that. They got rid of all the 12 square foot for quality housing deductions and all the other little bits that were kind of littered remnants in the zoning resolution, and they just have a 3 square foot per dwelling unit deduction. If you have the waste rooms on every floor, you're going to use it up there. But we're also talking to the building department about changing the code so you don't have to have the chutes. So then you could just have a central waste room like they do in many other cities, and use it for all waste streams. As you add waste streams, as we get to a circular city, could be by the delivery room. And in a true circular city, there is not a real distinction between goods in, waste out. So yeah, we're talking about how do you move towards that circular city. This is in our use. It's like, make it as easy to get a reusable cup for your coffee and dispose of it as disposing of a single-use one. That's how it has to be has to be more convenient for people. We don't all want to have our bags full of water bottles, reusable cups and sporks and stuff. We have to make it easy, and that's an easier proposition in a city like New York City with this high density. You could have this kind of reusable infrastructure throughout the city. We're actually really excited to be working on redemption infrastructure with a bit bigger bottle bill. The idea that to redeem cans and bottles now, if you could kind of develop that infrastructure into the city and then scale it up so that it could be a kind of stepping stone to reuse. And then save as you throw. I mean, that was starting to be studied in the city, but we need to think about that. With individual bins, it's easy to incentivize less trash, where you get some kind of savings if you use smaller bins or less bins for your building for trash. And then something that's not often talked about in circular economy is like, but if we can get rid of the huge flow of goods in and trash out, we can really work on low impact vehicles for last mile transport. We can really change our streetscapes in ways that we all want to. This is almost the end because I want to get to the panel. I realize I'm 5 minutes over my plan, but incorporating community is so important. I mean, we need to engage people for this change. It's a big change in behavior for people to separate waste properly and to realize what needs to be done. And I'm also part of the Save Our Compost Coalition. And what community composters are doing to engage people in the act of composting really makes people's minds change. It gives them hope. They see that their food scraps and yard waste is becoming soil that can be, compost that can regenerate soil, that can grow vegetables. This is in NYCHA housing where they have partnerships, Green City Force. They have farms and NYCHA residents can bring their food scraps and then get fresh vegetables. I mean, it's like, Domingo who runs it, it's like, I don't believe in recycling, but I believe in this. This is like tangibly, obviously, circularity at work. And as we move towards green infrastructure rather than grey infrastructure, it's not really possible for city agencies to maintain thousands and thousands of rain gardens and street trees. You need to involve the community. So what better way to engage them by making sure you kind of have funds to support community composting and stewardship of our green infrastructure and trees. And then there's just a lot of informal things. I mean, a lot of people have said, well, there's a lot of gleaners that open the bags and get new items in there, or a lot of people, as we know, curb alerts for reusable stuff. So how do we make sure that we're not throwing away usable things? That needs to be done with input of the community as well, like free stores, stoops. I mean, there's informal ways, but can we encourage it more? So you can download the report right here on our website if you didn't already get it with the email blasts or the LinkedIn or every way I have been pushing it. And then I would like to invite our panelists up so we can have a discussion. Thank you. And following the discussion, we'll be taking audience questions. And from those of you on Zoom, you can put it in the Q&A too. So I'm not going to go and introduce everybody individually, as I handily put up their bios right there. But we have Margaret, Adam, Steve, and Martin here, and representing kind of public space, previous DOT experience, building management and development, and building management there. So building ownership and development. So thank you. I think we have a good broad range of expertise here. So I guess I'll start with the shared containers for the small buildings, I think. And I think this is kind of a question for you both. It's like, okay, individual bins on sidewalks or within buildings set out versus the shared containers. Like, Margaret, you worked for DOT back in Bloomberg in the beginning of these changes in streets. I mean, I'll ask both of you, but first you, like, what do you see as kind of pros and cons and difficulties and of both.
Well, I'm just going to preface everything that. Is this on? Yes. So there's sort of three things that I've been thinking about, and the way I came into this conversation was through thinking about freight and logistics. So the zero waste goal is, to me, a sort of staggering goal, given that what I've been working on is the sort of opposite end of this, which, how many people here ordered something online to be delivered to their building in the last 2 days? Yeah, okay. So the increase starting during COVID was huge. So we're seeing this increase of demand for curbs, and then there's the boxes and the stuff and whatever, the things you throw away. There's also the idea of the cost to buildings, which you mentioned, and small buildings typically have trouble paying for much of anything. So there's that consideration, and then there's parking, you know, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot about that, but you need a place for this. So in terms of the smaller buildings, I think your plan or your proposal of getting things off the sidewalk is huge, but everyone else needs the curb as well. We have, you know, bike lanes. You showed one where there was a city bike station and then trash containers next to it. And it's like, how many parking spaces? I mean, I was in Bloomberg during those years when we located city bikes, and the controversy around taking one parking space to do that. So you need 3 parking spaces. So it gets really complicated. So I don't have an answer yet. I'm trying to, Adam and I were talking earlier, there's gotta be something like a key for this, and it's probably moving cars out of the way. And but I think that small buildings, somebody's gotta figure out how to get, who's responsible and who pays for this.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I have to say, I always thought it would be best to pilot first on those main streets with storefronts and the walk-ups above, like Vanderbilt in Brooklyn, because there, at least it's not full-time parking, it's likely metered parking. And there the residents are going to love it because they don't have any place to put the waste now. And so hopefully if you piloted it in those kind of places first, maybe that would... Maybe you persuade bit by bit, but yeah, you're right. Adam?
Well, we could have a long discussion about how to start piloting things, but so I don't come here as a waste expert per se, and I know there are many folks out here, Claire, you being probably top of the list, who really are experts. But the way I tend to approach things and WXY tends to approach things is really from a first principles perspective. So in a way, I wouldn't want to start with pros and cons.
Yeah,
I'd really
okay.
want to start with a set of first principles and then begin to address the challenges in holistic and integrative ways. And so when we begin to think about first principles, you've done a really good job outlining them. It's really a matter of working backwards from there. And so I think those first principles tend to be, when we talk about the public realm, what makes a public realm healthy, safety, and provides a sense of vitality. You know, really starting with those kind of abstract principles and then working backward from there. And when you begin to do that, I think you wind up in very similar places to where you've landed, which is, you know, especially looking at the kind of 1 to 9 unit segment, which is kind of where a fair bit of this discussion may focus, which is those first principles. When you think about what's going to provide vitality, it really is about those sidewalks feeling comfortable and active the way you want them to be. When you think about safety, you think about, you know, not having rats, and you think about ways of being most productive doing that. The containers work that way. But safety can also be looked at in a holistic and integrated way too, thinking about the way the containers are placed on the curb, thinking about we talked a little bit about this, the spacing of them, so you're also managing those intersections better. You're providing daylighting for pedestrians crossing streets, and so thinking very strategically about how safety gets integrated into these designs. And so I think you begin to work backwards and thinking about the healthiness of putting containers on the street, the kinds of space that you open up, not just on the sidewalks, but in front gardens, and the kind of greenery and social activity that can start to appear there instead of having waste containers there. You really do have so many opportunities that start to come forward. There are challenges, the costs, but let's move on to those next.
I love that approach. Yeah, very WXY. But so true. Like, how can you really activate the public realm with this? Yeah. Margaret, I know you have a couple of slides and storefronts with walk-ups at present in your like Fordham Road design and to a lesser extent in Restaurant Row. I mean, we could click to some of those if you want to show the way you've dealt with waste in any of those. You have to, it's a right click, and we have to go through some of your other slides first. Oh, and Martin's, keep going. Yeah, so this was the Delivering the Goods report that came out of the AIA 2, and that Margaret and Stantec, yeah.
Current existing conditions here. So I think one of the things that we use in all of the work that I do is try to quantify things. You count things, and you try to measure how much is there, who needs to be there at, and it's a time of day as well. So and we look at a very comprehensive sort of measuring of what has to happen at the last mile delivery, and how many trucks need to be there, how many cars, how many bus stops, how many people, and in all of the work that I did both at DOT and subsequently on Streetscapes, you need to know how much is coming in and out and what the demand is today and project what it might be in 5 years or 10 years. And so sort of putting all of that together, you come up with a kind of measured way of how you apportion space and particularly time of day. I think, so this one, you know, using all of these activities to provide other uses, which gets at what Adam was talking about, which is the quality of life on the street. We looked at using some of these activities to provide a protected bike lane, and then ways to cross, you know, sort of mid-block crossings perhaps, or things that you could do to provide more safety for pedestrians. And I think that the time of day thing is extremely interesting to me, but it requires enforcement, it requires cooperation, it requires a sort of collaborative effort, which I think people sometimes are not so good at. But I think we could get there if with guidance and with help from the neighborhood. So I think that's an important notion of what we do sort of sequentially on the street. So I don't have, you know, all of these storefronts have, and DOT is piloting a number of things like off-hour deliveries, micro, what are they calling it? Micro hubs. So some of these things will help with getting, for the storefronts that need services, happening at different times of day, and then your package delivery and package sorting happens at other places and other times of day. So sort of mapping all of that out is, I think, where I would go with this.
I mean, yeah, that makes when you're short of space, you have to think of the timing as well and swapping that around for sure. I'm going to move on to some of the large buildings and ask a question to Martin next. Really about, I mean, Martin manages a 300-odd unit building in downtown Brooklyn. He used to manage one in Harlem. There's a case study of it in the Zero Waste Design Guidelines on Strivers Gardens. So just a question about your day-to-day operational challenges of waste management in the building and how you see those could change or improve or get worse with containerization, either Department of Sanitation's or our proposals for large buildings.
So as a facilities manager, dealing with trash is a really big part of what I do every single day. One of the things that I really have to focus on is ensuring that the different streams are as easy as the compactor chute. So that's kind of our motto and what I push when I'm out speaking with other supers or I'm training my team. Everything we do needs to be as easy as the compactor chute. And what we mean by that is the compactor chute allows for people just to put anything in there, and it is kind of like a ghost because nobody knows where it comes from or where it goes, and it's just like, boom, it's done. So when you come into the compactor rooms or spaces at any of the buildings that either I manage or consult for, I want it to be open, I want it to be friendly, I want it to be easy. Now there are a number of things that can be done even before these items get to the market, get to my building, in terms of making plastic a kind of universal recyclable item. Right now, there are so many different things that you have to go through and say, well, is this cup actually recyclable, or do I throw that away? And that's very confusing in and of itself. So what I've done is communicate as much as I can, as often as I can with my residents to ensure that as easy as it is for them to recycle, and then educate my team on taking some of those items that may not really be recyclable out. When it comes to organics, particularly, and you had one of my slides up that I shared. I didn't have a lot of slides because there are so many good slides previously. So one of the things that I love about organics, and I've been a fan of organics way before it was mandatory. I've been doing organics and pushing organics for about, I would say, 7 years now. Even before it was mandatory, when I heard about it, I called the DSNY and said, hey, you've got to bring a truck over here. So they diverted a truck from the Bronx to come down to my building in Harlem and pick up the organics there. And what we found is I've got cleaner compactor chutes. I've got less rodents. Actually, people say, oh, it's going to smell. Less smell in the building. And one of the things I point out is every pound of organics that goes into those bins is 1 pound less that my team members have to handle at all. The way I have it set up at my building is it sits right there every day. I don't bring them in. We don't move them from the curb. It sits right there. So that means residents have to bring it out from their kitchens and dispose of it onto the curb. So that means my staff touches those bins zero unless it's when they're picked up and we rinse them down. We've been able to save thousands of dollars on bags. We've been able to save this year alone $8,000 on having our compactor chute cleaned. So these are real numbers that I push out to boards and managers and say, hey, this is saving real money. I actually, you see I have 8 out of there. I have a total of 10, and I got 3 from the building across the street because they just didn't believe in it and they weren't doing it. So 3 of those came because DSNY didn't give it. And to speak to your point, I think one of the reasons I'm so involved in this because some of these are really great ideas, but they don't always think about the end user. So the DSNY gave my building 2 bins. I have 303 units. They gave me 2 bins. Makes no sense. Did not work and would not work. And as we push the communication about organics to the residents, we're upscaling the number of bins that we need. We keep 2 inside because we also have a garage, so we have 2 in the garage space, and then the rest of these stay out on the street. And again, it's an awesome thing. I'm all for the containerization. One of the things that it was a big challenge when I came to Brooklyn in this building, luxury building. They spent about $4 million on the lobby, and you walk out and about 10 feet to the left, you could not get by the sidewalk because it was literally packed with trash 2 days out of the week. literally you could not, you had to walk out in the street to get by. So we got a baler. We put in a baler that helped to reduce the amount of cardboard boxes. Amazon loves to send you a box that's 3 times the size that you need. So we were able to bale the items and the boxes up, and then putting items into the street. We actually just stole the street parking space. So I'm kind of just a maverick when it comes to that, and we just said, hey, I'm going to take this space, and we constantly have, I don't know if you can notice, but we filled those construction barricades with cement, so you can't move them. But now the sidewalk stays clean and clear. And I'm at a unique building because I'm right there by the NYPD, the fire department, 911 call center. So the police kind of do whatever they want to do. You can see across the street, they're kind of parked on the sidewalk. So there is a huge fight for the sidewalk. Because of COVID, we had to fight for our space to get it back from the restaurants and all this other stuff that's going on. So I'm kind of jumping on board with New York City's plan to reduce the amount of cars. I think New York does really good already, believe it or not, across the board with the amount of cars that are on the street. But the reality is you don't really need a car in New York. That's just the reality, especially in the city. And there are so many other things we need to do with that space. So I'm all for doing whatever we can. I'm a huge fan of containerization and compacting what we have because that absolutely saves space.
Thank you. No, that was great. Definitely here. I've done a tour of the building, and if any of you read the New York Times article, you'll realize why I sent those journalists to visit Martin. But yeah, I really heard loud and clear you want bags off sidewalks and containerization. Did you have any kind of would you prefer the chutes to go in the 4-wheel bins to go out, or you think the bags to permanent containers in the street work better? Do you have any, I'm sure you have pros and cons to both, but thoughts.
New York is so unique, and buildings are really individual, and you can't approach it as a one-size-fits-all. You really can't. There needs to be the flexibility to do what's best for a particular building. Compartmentalization and containerization would actually not really work too well at my particular building, the building that is illustrated here. But other buildings, it would work great, particularly Stryver's Gardens. If you recall, the compactor room was huge. I had 2 of them, and there was plenty of space. My building has challenges when it comes to adding certain things to it. So while I'm a fan of containerization, absolutely, and I've seen that when we talk about rats, and that being one of the biggest strives to kind of deal with that, we've been able to reduce the number of rats that we saw at our building through composting. We still put the sausage bags out, and yes, they still have organics in them. My building right now is probably at about 30%. When I left Stryver's Gardens, we were about 70% of diversion, and that's huge. We had about 15 bins, and that was only a 170-unit building. So residents will get involved. Residents will do it with the help of education and board, and it didn't really cost much. The DSNY at that time was giving out bins, and they were giving out countertop bins. But my answer to that, and the true answer that I believe in my heart, is it has to be flexible enough to fit for every individual building that we have, and if it's too rigid, it's not going to work. So it really needs to be a flexible plan across the board for individual buildings, and we need to have more resident managers, more supers involved, more end users that kind of share what works at their particular building.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And I have to say, I've never seen such a small compactor room as the building you have now. I mean, it was right before 1968 code, so it didn't have the 1 square foot per dwelling unit. It is really, really tiny. But yeah, point taken about different solutions for different buildings. Steve, Phipps, you both develop and manage buildings. Just wanted to ask you about the operational challenges and maybe delve into a bit about costs as well.
Okay. I think I do have one slide up here. But so over the past couple of months, to get prepared for what we're doing and to understand our waste management. I shadow a lot of our porters through multiple buildings, and our portfolio is a little bit between the mid-size, that 10 to 30, and then the larger scale buildings, which are 30 plus. I agree completely that one size is not going to fit all for all of the properties, even on the larger buildings, because our challenges are going to be mostly the older buildings that have the smaller compactor rooms, that don't have the recycling rooms on the top floor. And I think our biggest issue is a little bit of getting buy-in by all the residents to participate. And we're going to be doing a lot more incentive programs in order to get our recycling up. Let's say, for example, in a building that would be 6 stories, would have a recycling room on every single floor. That should take roughly around 1 hour for a porter to go from floor to floor, picking up the recycling, cleaning up the refuge room, and sanitizing the compactor chute. Most of the ones I've been on have been about 5 to 6 hours because the porter is actually doing the recycling. They're going to each of the spaces, they're pulling out, they're putting down the recycling, and then taking it down. And then when you get down to the compactor room, a lot of times you're finding that you're having to open up those sausages and go through those, which is very, I would say, dangerous, because you're throwing down glass, and so that glass is shattering. You've got medical supplies that are in there, and so the porters are required to kind of recycle all of that, because if not, then it comes into maintenance and operation costs, because we'll get fined on the street every time that our bags aren't there. So I think I'll jump to, those are our challenges, and we're doing some incentive programs. We have courtyard buildings, we're doing organics in our courtyards, and doing some other things to try to basically decrease the waste streams and keep them separate. I put up a slide of the old Easy Pack program. I don't know if people are familiar with that. If you have an Easy Pack program, then you love it most of the time. And if you don't know what it is, because they no longer do it. But I think this comes very close to the compartmentalization on wheels. So thank you. Because what I've found is our lowest injury rates, our lowest workers' comp, the best recycling, the best use, the cleanest of our spaces have been the buildings that have Easy Pack. And what happens is that compactor comes straight down and into the machine. Nobody's dealing with sausages. There's no plastics. And then there's centralized, because of the age of the buildings, there's some centralized in the buildings, but most of the time residents have to come down to a ground floor recycling area, so they're already getting used to bringing down their recycling. And although they are massively heavy and very difficult to get out, they're the similar situation. They just go out on the street. We have less pest problems and such. So I'm very much in favor of that concept and moving towards that concept.
Yeah, I mean, they are very similar, the ones we're recommending, but with a crucial difference that they're a lot lighter, and they are not as long. Like Easy Packs, thank you so much, Martin, are about 6 foot long. They don't fit in a lot of elevators. The international style 4-wheel bins are about 1.5 cubic yards. They fit into elevators. You can get slightly narrower ones that are 1 cubic yard that fit through a regular 36-inch doorway. So that kind of lighter weight one, I think, makes a lot of difference. These are not very easy to maneuver in buildings.
So I shadow the porters, but I also help them the whole entire time. And those things, you need about 2 people to push down the concrete and then up the ramp into the ground floor.
But that said, Avalon, as developers, all their new buildings like Avalon Fort Greene, they designed for the 2 cubic yard containers and private hauler collection, because they did not want their staff moving bags. They did not want bags in front of their buildings. So they were like, we save on staff labor, 1 less porter if we don't have the bags, and we pay for the private hauling. So yeah, some developers have seen that there is really a benefit from not having bags. moving bags.
Well, and I don't want to take over that part of it, but the cost piece, let's say, for example, I'm going to put on my developer hat. You know, one would say, in all of these, does it decrease development costs? Does the new zoning rules help lower those costs? And I would say yes. And where they lower the cost is actually the maintenance and operations piece to the overall cost, because when you're developing out that piece of property, and again, I'm not the finance guy, so I'm going to simplify this really, really down to an architect's brain. But in essence, you have this sorry, I'm not, I am an architect, so I'm not trying to insult anyone. My dad was an engineer. He would consider the never mind. I'll stop. But the idea that in essence, when we put together the finance packages, it's a three-legged stool. You have the cost of the building, right? So that is the maintenance and operations, and it is your debt to the construction loans. And so then you have your income associated to that that's got to counterbalance that, which is the rent, either in the residential or the commercial spaces on the ground floor, both, basically both. And so any time that we can slowly decrease that operational cost, then we can either make sure that our rents stay low in terms of the AMI, or put that back into the debt savings to do other work on that building as we build it, or bring us down the cost of the overall project. And I'll give a tangible example. We're working on AC3. It's Atlantic Chestnut 3. It's with Datner Architects. They're doing an amazing job. We just completed AC1. We're on to AC2. But we looked at, through this shadow study, the amount of time, the claims that we have, all of those elements, and through a concept of how we could lower all of those maintenance and operation costs, we then went back to the formula and we realized that we had enough money that we could then do a tri-sorter. So we're going to do a tri-sorting through the building system, be able to move the compactor back up to the ground floor, which would be the most expensive real estate associated to it, and then work on how residents could then have a central zone on the ground floor where they could distribute their organics and that sort of thing. And so it works that way, in which, yes, if you can move all of those things together, then it lowers your development costs.
That's great that you did that study to actually figure that out. So would you consider, do you think, in FIPS, like if actually building code officials did say you probably could just do a CCD1 and ask to have a ground floor waste room if it was equal convenience, and maybe you could get that approved. Would that be something FIPS would consider, do you think, just a central waste room and not providing a chute on every floor?
I think, so one of the things that we're going to be doing is a pilot program on our organics, and we're looking at our different buildings. We do have buildings in which they don't. They're older buildings.
Yeah, but for
and
a new
residents
building,
come down. If it is successful in that idea of getting residents to get into a habit of saying, hey, I can come down to a central waste area, drop off my recycling, drop off my clothing, drop off all of these different waste streams, then I think it would be a benefit. One of the things that we don't want to do is create a scenario in which, you know, we want to make sure that all the residents are having all the benefits, and that particularly affordable housing benefits that everyone else has. And that's why we have doorman buildings, and that's why we have courtyards, and that's why you have access to the roofs, and that's why all of those things. And so I have found, when having conversation with residents, that they like the convenience of the waste rooms, the ability to just walk out of your room, put in your recycling, and then go back to your, rather than having to hold on to it in your kitchen. So it'll be a kind of a combination, and possibly which building works best, but definitely we would think about that. I know that we are looking at that at AC3.
Yeah. I mean, actually, Martin, it was you that really taught me how different it is to have how the organics are so different from the recycling. And, you know, just I thought to start with, just put the organics next to the recycling on every floor. That's equal convenience disposal. But you share quite a few difficulties to do with, like, the way they're emptied, I don't know if you want to talk to that and what you would think about a central one or the difficulties of having organics on every story.
So organics, the movement of organics, and if anybody here, composts or collects their organics, you don't really need to take your organics out every day. You don't have that much spoilage that's going out. So I do it because my wife tells me to, and that's actually how I got started doing it, because she told me to. And we would take it out probably about two times a week. Wasn't a smell at all, because I wouldn't put up with having a smell in the apartment, so it wasn't a huge smell at all by using just the regular. I don't even have the what's it called, the not the bags or the carbon filters. We don't even have a carbon filter. We just bought the bin from Container Store, put it on the side of the garbage can, and when it fills up, we take it out, or I take it out in the morning when I'm going downstairs, dump it out, and then take it back and rinse it out. It is super easy, but having that in every single compactor room, one, I don't have the space in every single compactor room to have another bin in there. Two, it would create a smell on the hallways that is not necessary. Allowing residents to come out when they're leaving the building and drop it is super easy. A lot of people will put it in their refrigerator or freezer and freeze it and then bring it out when it's too much. So people will adapt to different things. But I would push back when it comes to the recycling items, the plastic, paper, metal, those things. We wouldn't want to. It's too easy for them to put them in the compactor chute. So again, when you go into any one of my compact rooms, you're going to see three options. You're going to have your paper and cardboard. You're going to have your metal, glass, paper, and then you're going to have the compactor chute. So having those options really allows that stream to be maintained. And then I didn't mention this, but we fine residents if we find out that they're improperly recycling. So there has to be some teeth behind these policies. And usually you only need to do that once. You hit somebody with a $50 fine, they're going to inform whomever put that item down the chute not to do it again. So when we find those things through mail or a book that has somebody's name on it or a box that they wanted to throw down the chute, we will send them a fine. And that comes through the support of the board and the management company. So again, there are a number of options and things that need to happen. You can't necessarily institute all of those practices, but you figure out what works at your building and you do it. But definitely having the organics on the street has really made our sausage bags cleaner. It really has. It's made our compactor chute cleaner. It's made our main compactor room cleaner. And again, it saved us a lot of money on having to clean the compactor chute, which was a big expense.
Thank you. And okay, moving over to Adam and Margaret on the large buildings and the temporary set out of four-wheel bins. Just your thoughts about that and how we could integrate that into curb access streetscape design.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to step back a moment, one of the things that's really interesting about this challenge is there's a massive divide between what happens on street and what happens off street. And you will find that the off-street elements are much more regulated in a way and much more codified, and there's a lot more code around these issues. And it comes up in all sorts of ways, and it speaks to the kind of the lack of communication and lack of integration in the city. We worked on a study that was looking at freight, and the city has two things happening with freight. One is you have loading docks that are required in buildings, and then you have on-street loading zones. There's absolutely no relationship between the two. You can have a block that has all old buildings that have no loading docks, and you have the same number of on-street zones as you will for a block that has new buildings, has thousands of loading docks. And so there's a real challenge here, and I think it speaks to this question about what you do with large buildings, that there's essentially no integration between Department of City Planning, Department of Buildings, Department of Sanitation, Department of Transportation, parks you can throw in as well. And so to get to this challenge in a way, you do need to have that integration. And so, you know, one of the beautiful things that you demonstrated about your approach to four-wheeled containers, bringing them out to the street, is that you're not like moving things in and out of bins, and it's just very seamless. So clearly, it makes a lot of sense. There is this question about permanently reserving a space at the curb for those bins that may be out there twice a week. And so that, I think, that's a challenge that needs to be worked out.
Well,
That's not a
actually, in
sanitary.
it was a different stream every day. We had them
Or every
out there
day,
every day.
in fact,
Or
yes.
6 days a week for
Yeah.
all different streams.
So in that sense, maybe it is, you get Department of Transportation to put out a little sign post for you that says this is a dedicated waste zone. But it still will feel quite temporal. There'll be a lot of temptation for all of those people who are doing building repairs to occupy those spaces. So that kind of so I think the proposal is fantastic. I think the application of it and the implementation of it requires this kind of bureaucratic agency collaboration that we're not really finding, and that the enforcement issues would be quite intense around what you're suggesting. But I think it's a great idea. And to do that, too, that enforcement piece is going to be critical. I think there's a whole analytical piece along the curb, which we can talk about in a bit, that could really help with that.
I'm going to pass it to Margaret because you worked for DOT and you
Yeah,
think about
I mean,
these things.
I think one of the biggest challenges, and I think back to work, well, I still work for the city and we do lots of projects with the city, but there is very little examination of the relationship between land use and streets and transportation. What goes on at the curb, which is controlled by DOT, and then the actual zoning or land use, and how big a building you can have in a given area. The relationship is very tenuous, and so it makes it very hard to organize the needs for large buildings. And listening to you, both of you talk about how it sounds so easy to organize. I lived in small buildings for 35 years in New York, and we were, you know, a 10 unit building, and we had no full-time super, and we had a tiny trash room, and it was just a nightmare all the time, and it was just, you know, and there's more buildings like that in New York City than there are these larger buildings, which speaks to maybe we should densify more places, and then we could deal with this problem. But I think the issue of, and there's a lot of effort right now at city planning with City of Yes to look at some of these rezonings, to look at the issues. I'm going to just bring up something. It may sound a little random, but I was at an event this morning which was about resilience and about water. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, we were talking about the HATS, which, you know, protecting our waterfront. But Rit Agarwal gave a keynote, and what he was talking about, which I did not know this, New York City has some of the best water in the world, in the country. And because of the way that the city charges every single building for water, the big buildings pay more, it's based on use, they have an enormous budget which pays for, they don't have any problem with capital projects, so they can do whatever they need to do for water. And I was thinking about this because I was going to come to this panel tonight. It's like, well, trash is free. Delivery is, there's no such thing as free delivery, by the way, for those Amazon packages, even though we think that there is, it's free delivery. And the same is true of trash. We haven't talked yet about where all this stuff goes and how the city, you know, pays for the, you know.
We kind of talked about that in the zero waste design guidelines. We were also looking at the kind of system benefits charge for energy and how you can filter that into innovation. Like, could there be some filtering of money into improving the waste system? Yes, through incentives or
Right.
reducing or whatever.
But
Yeah.
but I mean this coordination of equipment that sanitation needs,
Yeah.
who buys the bins, replacement
Yeah.
bins, you know, all of that stuff. It just seems to me that if you handle it the way we handle water and acknowledge that it's an essential service for the
Yeah.
city, that it would be, I mean, this is just kind of
Yeah, and metering
riffing.
for water was a
Right.
big deal when they brought that in, and you know
It's
all the
huge.
toilets were
It's
changed.
huge.
It was huge.
Now,
and there was,
granted, it's hard to bring in, and it's like taking away parking. It's hard to do it after the fact, but there, I think the large building, small building piece is really critical to figure this out, and then like what are your rights to the curb, because some of these larger buildings actually don't take up that much more space than like 10 townhouses, and
Yeah.
you've got far fewer people, so
and I
you're,
think
you're
your
better
point,
organized.
I think your point about small buildings not having the staff is huge, which is
They
why
don't
we
have
want
resources.
the city to provide for the small buildings.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Sarah, so I'm going to jump onto that and have the conversation a little bit about, in terms of how we pay for garbage. If we look at, and you probably have all the studies, but if we look at cities that you are charged per can,
Yep.
you have an interest in making sure that you're recycling. You have an interest in making sure that you're getting organics. You have an interest in all of those things, just like water, right? As soon as we start having to pay for water, then we have an interest in decreasing the amount of water that we're using. Or if we have, and we're not there yet in New York City, and I don't know how one would do it, but I think
There was a study commissioned, and they actually signed the contract for the study, and under Catherine Garcia, then she actually cut that study. So, I mean, yeah, there has to be a study with a consultant to figure out how best to do it, the save as you throw, but that was one of the ways we would get to zero waste. And yeah, it's pretty easy with the four-wheeled or the individual bins. With the shared containers, it's more difficult. It could be done with access control. I feel like maybe it could be done on a block scale. I'm sure there's things that could be figured out. It would be more difficult, but yeah. But you know what? I realize it's 7:30, and I want to give the audience time for questions. I know we have a pretty educated audience here. I also want to encourage any of you who are hungry. That food was actually not for this event. It was left over from this morning. I was going to have to apologize for not having provided it, but go reduce food waste by eating some. And as we take questions, we have 2 roaming mics if you put your hand up, and we also can take questions from Q&A on Zoom. So if you want to pick one of the hands up, and we'll get a question there. In the back, maybe. Oh, no, right here.
In Barcelona, every resident goes and puts in their bin in the containers in the street. Do you think there's a time where instead of the building managing all the stuff, that the individual person goes and twice a week puts their stuff into the container in the street?
That is our solution for the smaller buildings, yes, exactly like that the residents would put the waste in that's the center's solution for smaller buildings, that it would be like Barcelona, that there would be the bins in the street for all waste streams, and the residents would go and put it directly. Yeah, that's what we're showing for the 1 to 9 unit buildings for sure, and 10 to 30, even a little bit more, I think. As Martin said, you know, some of the buildings may not be able to do the 4-wheel bin solution, and it'll be a bit of a... Great, thank you. Sure.
So I run an operations department at a pretty big management company, and I think we just started to touch on it, but I guess I wanted to know if there's any study or if you've done any research on the revenue to the city, because every time the city makes a law, I don't think it's out of the goodness of their heart or protect all of us necessarily. It's to make money. And every time they make a new law, they make a new market. So if you're going to take away parking to do waste containerization, I'd say, well, how much metering have you lost? How many tickets have you lost? That's all revenue to the city. And I would argue that if you want to get the city to do something, you have to couch it in terms of money.
That's a good question. It's not something I've looked at. I don't know if anybody else wants to talk about that at all.
Well, I'll just quickly say, I mean, half of the parking on residential street, or more than, is free it's free parking. The city doesn't make a dime on it. So free parking, free delivery, free everything. The commercial parking, on streets where there is a lot of commercial use, yes, there is a charge for parking. And the city does make marginal amounts of money. It's not insignificant, but it helps to keep cars moving. It helps to give commercial buildings the availability of delivery space. So it does serve a purpose. You want to add something?
Well, I mean, I think you just solved our problem, actually, because, you know, instead of charging for waste, we could also just charge for parking and use that to pay for the waste space. And yeah, I think it's a great option. It obviously makes sense to charge people for the amount of waste they have so they reduce, but I think that's a great source right there.
Yeah, the parking space.
And so, I lived in Georgia for about 10 years, and we always paid for our garbage to be picked up. I think the way that I see this in the long term is that there absolutely will be a charge for garbage to be put out on the street, that there's going to be an incentive to recycle, and that incentive is going to be you pay for the black bags, you pay less for recycling items, and maybe zero for composting. To your point, I think one of the issues that I would have with, and I do have with smaller buildings having to manage, or the public as a whole having to manage items being put directly into those different streams, is contamination. And you can contaminate an entire bucket of really good recyclable items by dropping a hamburger or something in there, and now you have to destroy that entire stream. So those are all great measures. The streams that we have, or the containers that we have on the street, really don't work with the little circle that you can supposed to only put the cups in. They just don't work. So I think there's a lot of thought that needs to go into how we make this open, and with the study, there's been a lot of ideas with having to tap your app or something like that. So there's some good ideas out there, and I think we'll eventually get there. But ultimately, yes, you're going to have to pay to put the black bags on the street, ultimately.
Yeah, and I like the DEP argument, because DEP, it's done at a building level, the water metering, and then it incentivizes the building manager to make sure that everything's low flow in the building. It could be done the same way for waste at a large building level, incentivizing all building managers to be like Martin. Do you want to take one from Zoom? We'll take one from Zoom.
We'll take one question from Zoom. So Jean mentioned that they're a wheelchair user who has to, if they have to carry trash, recyclables, organics down to the first floor, it's almost impossible for them to do that frequently. So in response to your conversation about how these solutions have to be bespoke for every single building, how do you take accessibility into account within the building and outside the building?
Yeah, I mean, I do know from working in other cities that often they'll have, special, like they'll go collect from different buildings in Raleigh, for example, if there's someone who can't get the bins to the place where they have to go to. I mean, a bit like Accessoride, but I don't know if anybody else wants to kind of take that question.
I mean, I think it's a great question. I was just going to say that the need to move waste 200 feet, I think you were sort of scoping out as a distance. It's not nothing, for sure. And the idea that perhaps buildings start to have caddies, or basically wheeled carts to help them get there if they need. They're obviously not going to have in the 1 to 9 unit situation, you may not have bins in your front yard, but you may have some kind of cart that can help you get there as well. But it's certainly a real consideration.
Yeah, I don't know if Martin, as a building manager,
So
what
I've
you
dealt
have
with that.
you?
I deal with that. So I have 2 residents in my current building that need to have amenities made specifically for them. And when it came to the compactor chute, we added a paddle on the bottom. Well, it's probably knee high, really, and you push it and the compactor chute opens up on that floor. And then the bins themselves are at that level. So, and those recycling items or the compactor chute is on every floor. Again, the only thing that they would have to bring out at my building would be their organics. That's kept at the curb, but those organic bins are also fairly low. We've actually removed the mechanism that locks the containers and just put a 1 pound weight on the back side, so that also keeps it closed, so there's no lifting or unlatching of those bins, but it still closes. So all of those measures and adjustments can be made.
But if you had a resident that needed special accommodation to use them, is that something you'd just work out on a case-by-case basis?
Yes, yes. Yeah.
I think also what would happen if we had shared containers on the street is I could see it as a business opportunity for someone who didn't want to walk 200 feet. You could call, I don't know, like the person, not Uber, but some, who would come and help with that.
It's a little like that in Hong Kong, actually. In the dense part of Hong Kong, they have refuse collection points, and there are people who clean
guarantee there would be
apartments and bring it to
there would be
there.
some business opportunities there.
But it's a good question, and yes, something that has to be figured out. Let's take one from the audience. Where's the roving mic? Maybe over this side there's a couple. Sorry, making you go all the way around there. Oh, let me see.
I actually wanted to say that the thing that seems to make these recycling bins that are now on the streets so successful is this idea that you have to register and
Oh, you mean the orange
you
food
cannot
scrap
open
ones?
them if you are not using your app. And that accountability is what keeps that recycling stream clean. And why can't you do this everywhere?
Yeah, you know what? I was in Bergen, Norway, where they had a pneumatic system, and it was interesting because the trash was open for everybody, and it doubled as a litter bin. But the recycling, you had to have a special key fob. So you're right. Controlling access makes it less.
Do it on your sidewalk. Anywhere.
It makes it less contaminated, but then it does make it a little less convenient if you're just asking your kid to take it out, or you don't happen to be, not everybody has a smartphone, it's not as accessible. So there is kind of a balance there, but you're right, it could, access control could help for some of the streams.
Hi, so I agree. I think that, the city starting to charge for waste is a great solution. I think shared bins in the streets for small buildings to share together is a good solution, but they kind of don't work together. If you have buildings that are now being charged by the amount of waste that they're producing, it gives them incentive to recycle, it gives them incentive to compost, but if they're now sharing a waste bin, it's now impossible to differentiate which building is producing how much waste. And I'm wondering if you've thought about that, if we're moving toward, buildings being charged for waste as well as, sharing space for their waste drops out on the street, how that would work.
I think it's a complicated thing that has to be studied, but I do think if someone's living in a 300-unit building and the building's getting charged for the amount of trash, it's very unlikely that a resident's going to be like, oh, I'm going to take mine around the corner just to reduce my maintenance fees possibly in the future. That's unlikely how much people will go to that extent. So I think it would still work at a building level to charge for, say, those four-wheel bins. How it works for a share container, I agree, has to be looked at. And whether it's access, whether even in a big building you can pass it on. We discussed this in the guidelines. Could you charge for each time you enter the waste room? Could it be at that level? I think there's a lot of stuff that would have to be looked at, piloted, and evaluated. It's not easy to know what the solutions are, but I think on a broad level, we're getting back to our broad strokes, some kind of feedback and incentive to do the right thing. Even if it's just, I've talked about Martin with this, at the moment, if a building recycles well, they need more space. So it's harder because it's collected less frequently. So incentives for building staff to do the right thing and encourage their residents to do the right thing, those that don't have wives like Martin.
So we've looked at that, as the young lady before you mentioned, in terms of bins needing an access or app to be able to do it. And we've actually looked at that on a building level to kind of see if we could manage the compactor chute. So at the newer buildings, everybody has a smartphone, and you have to have your smartphone in order to get into the building itself. That same mechanism can be easily integrated onto the compactor chute, so you need to tap it in order to unlock it. And then, but where does it go beyond that? How do you kind of ensure that what goes in the chute at that point, it can be connected back to the person that actually tapped? But I think the solution there is a locking mechanism that we already have in place that would only allow the buildings that are supposed to use bin 3 to access that bin on the block. And then you look at various means of monitoring that, whether it's a different color bag or a barcode. One of the times when we were doing a waste study, I had all my porters, they had to mark the sausage bag that they put on the street with their initials, so that if the DSNY stopped or left the bag because it was too heavy, I would know which porter put that bag out, and they would have to then break that down. So there are a number of different things that can be implemented, but it's really not inventing the wheel. It's known that if you charge and monitor residents for their electricity, they use less electricity. If you pay for their electricity, then they use more. So once again, you start to charge people back for their usage on anything, they become more conscious about what they're doing. And we see that with the bags. You know, now that we have to pay for bags, everybody is bringing their own bag for the most part to the stores. And then that's just going to pick up. So I think we have the solution. It's really just about putting it out there, making the sell for it, and then initializing and moving forward in it.
Could I just add one thing that I think would be interesting, because I think not only the technology that we have to deal with this right now, but sort of looking ahead and sort of saying, well, if we cut back the amount of, what are we going to be doing in 5 years from now if you did the following, 6 things in terms of reducing trash or reducing a certain, I think sort of what are the, and then what are the advances in sort of trash handling that are going to happen? We're going to run out of landfill, and where is this stuff going to go? And are we going to have to pay for more things to move it? And is recycling going to get better? Are we going to have less plastic? So I think, we look at this all the time in terms of trying to predict the future in terms of, how many people are going to need to walk down the street, or how many, cars are going to be moving through X place. And we try to plan for that future. And, I've never thought much about the future of trash, and I'm not thinking, what is that? What does that
I
look
think
like?
that's a really good point. A huge part of bids dollars are spent on sanitation, and how does that weigh up if we, and they say the bins are all full of cups, if we have a reusable cup program, those pay for themselves when they're off the ground. You need to kind of get them going with city investment, but then they pay for themselves. They're better environmentally. How much savings could we get in reducing in the amount of landfill costs, collection costs, bid costs? I think there's a lot of paybacks. Even policies that make food halls use reusable, or dine-in, you have to use reusable dishes. That is a very low-hanging fruit one for reducing trash. Food donation policies. There's a lot that can happen that don't even require costs. But yeah, that balance of what we can save, how can we reduce the landfill costs is huge. We'll take one more from the audience, and we'll go to Zoom again. So whoever's closest to the mic. Juliet.
Well, this is so exciting to see, and I think one thing that I think that this on containerization does is really sort of, to the first principles point, sort of refocuses the discussion away from purely Department of Sanitation and what is Department of Sanitation going to do into what are we all going to do. And I think that's really exciting. And I was thinking about what Martin Robertson said about, we can't have a one-size-fits-all solution. And it reminded me that this sort of approach is sort of starting with sanitation, which is so useful, right? Looking at their plans, coming up with an alternative. But there's a third piece that I think now would be exciting to look at. And Margaret mentioned this when you said, well, maybe there'll be this new economy around, like, if somebody has, time and they can take someone else's waste out and get money for that. Well, if somebody has space, maybe they have a loading dock, then maybe the building that doesn't have room for a compactor, for those containers, could bring their waste to that loading dock the way that Battery Park City does. So I think there's room, like as a next step, it would be very exciting to start to look at those interstitial spaces and other spaces that are not the street, even if we have to respond to the sanitation's like street-focused.
Yeah, and I had a little discussion with a bid on that, in fact. They were like, well, could we use a space in a loading dock to containerize our bid waste rather than buying one of these expensive on-street ones? And they didn't get a clear answer from Department of Sanitation, but they were like, we could put a baler in there. I mean, it would be very easy to compact those cups into way less volume. So it wouldn't be a lot of space. But yeah, I think that kind of collaboration is a good point. I don't know if anybody else wants to take that one. Yeah. Okay, we'll take one from Zoom.
Beth wanted to address, again, the issue with rent-stabilized rental buildings and how the lack of resources contributes to the difficulty with rolling out containerization when there's a lot more challenges to educate residents, when there's no central email list or communication platform, and residents speak multiple languages. So going on to next steps and piloting strategies, what are some best practice strategies for incorporating buildings of all different types, especially rent-stabilized rental buildings?
Do you want to talk to that, Steve? Or?
Well, so right now we are looking at some pilot programs, and it's a lot to do with the organics, because organics are a little bit more difficult to deal with. We don't want them in the waste rooms or the refuge rooms. Luckily, a lot of our properties have courtyards, and so we're looking at that. But in doing so, we're looking at incentive programs. So if we think that getting residents, right, if we are able to provide the residents with the organic can and a stackable metals, plastics, and a paper, then, and maybe do an incentive program that says, okay, on this floor, we're all competing, and if you have 80% more recycling on your floor and less contamination, then in essence, we take that money that would have been used for all those extra hours that we have to put in and incentivize somebody. That's a possibility. We've also been talking with some of the reverse vending machine companies to put reverse vending machine in our laundry rooms, where residents could then bring down, while they're bringing down their laundry, their cans and bottles, get the money. That money goes right back onto a card. Not as good an incentive program because it's like 50 cents to your $1.25 laundry room, but those are all different ideas and incentives that would make individuals want to participate in a program.
I mean, it clearly requires a huge amount of energy. I loved, I think it was in your presentation, or someone spoke about composting feeling much more real than recycling, and that idea that you understand the exchange of compost and then receiving back fresh vegetables. Yeah. I thought there was something really interesting in the idea of incentivizing through some kind of real exchange there, that's you're able to essentially deliver your compost, and then there's a kind of exchange that happens there. But all of the things that we're talking about requires a huge amount of energy and attention. materials in multiple languages. These are things that city agencies often really struggle with, but the idea that you could build an incentive program at scale for this would be
I mean, that
very
was
interesting.
us talking as well about no, I talked about it in nature housing with the nature farms, but also at a community scale, we have a page that talks about engaging community in these efforts, because I think that's really what it has to be about. I mean, Martin and I both helped a little bit on some of the Manhattan Solid Waste Advisory Board. They led this kind of how to develop a culture of recycling or organics collection in your building and how you do that. I mean, it is a kind of community thing that has to happen in buildings.
And by the way, I'll give you an example of Villa Verde. Villa Verde has the community garden. It only has a small recycling program based on mostly the plant organics, and we are going to be rolling out an organics program there as well for composting. But again, it builds community. So the Villa Verde community is kind of pulled together because of that garden experience, because of that organics experience.
Yeah, and I think we're nearing time, right? Can we have one last question? It's 5 to 8. Do we have to be out at 8 exactly? Okay, one last question, just a quick one, and then Jim right there with the hand up.
Hi, interesting discussion. A couple things occurred to me. One is that the range of questions here sort of indicates that we're already way behind in even thinking about this and thinking about ways to implement it, learning from, pilots, mistakes, whatever. My question gets back to this question about street management. There's what happens in the building, what happens when it goes to some other location, whether it's recycling or landfill, but still, the transfer point happens on the street or the sidewalks. And Margaret talked about all the different uses that are competing for that space. I'll just throw in a couple more. There's, MTA, bus stops, police and fire, emergency access, bike kiosks, they all take a lot of space. What, amongst all of our thinkers up here, what agency should be in charge of coordinating all of this? Because right now it sounds like sanitation is sort of on their side doing their planning. DOT has their, and the other one is the restaurants, the open restaurants that are now, an established street use. So how do we sort out these priorities to decide how much space to allocate to each one of these different uses, where that is amongst all the uses? I'll just
Great question, and we have probably 20 seconds to answer it. So, you want 10? That is the kind of core question, and we were talking about that earlier. And I think that basically, you're not going to create another city agency. You just aren't. And I think you need a mayoral administration. And listening, I think Rit Agarwala should run this program. But there's an example of this is he has reorganized DEP to be the Department of Environmental Protection, which is water, and they have a new unit, and I just heard it this morning, so I can't remember what it is, but to acknowledge changes in the way we do operations. So there has to be a change within, and I think there's a freight office within DOT, there's a land use part of city planning. I think it's possible. I think there needs to be some leadership at City Hall.
Yeah. So, great question. Our office has been struggling with this. New York City is so data rich in so many ways, and then when it comes to the curb, it's not really very data rich. So our office actually just released and made it open to the public. I wish I could remember the URL, where you can access all the parking regulations in New York City. And we actually measured them by length. And so you can go online, I'm gonna go visit this place and I want 2-hour parking. What's the 2-hour parking in the area? So that was like kind of a revelation that we could produce that. But the idea that you start to layer that up with the, restaurants, which now will have to be permitted, with the bike lanes, some of which are right up against the curb, and then you have parking that's protecting them. With all of the other pieces of furniture, some of that you can do with LiDAR. Sometimes trees are in the way, but we actually need to start by making our street management data rich as the off-street stuff that we have. So that would be a starting point.
Thank you, everybody. I know we need to get out of here pretty quickly.